masks all the time. And they devote their lives to meditation and prayer and study and good works. Now, he came from that background. He could have become a Jain monk, this guy. But instead he went and studied philosophy. And I think he fell in love with the incredible richness of human intellectual history. India was obviously highly sophisticated religious traditions, so he went to a good university and studied academically. I think it was in Pune, but I may be wrong. And he fell in love with them all, you know. But like all true seekers, he wanted the absolute truth behind them. He didn't want to just become a Buddhist or become a Sufi or become a Christian or even stay as a Jain. He was asking the same question: where's the pole behind the pole behind the pole? Where's the ultimate truth behind them all? And that began a lifetime searching for him. He did, you know, his time of very profound study. And then after about 10 years of that, he parted company with his Jain guru. He said, "Oh, guru," you know, because in India, being born into a community like the Jains is a big thing, and you get like initiated into it, and your guru is very important. His guru was Acharya Tulsi, actually, who I met. And he went to Acharya Tulsi and said, "I love you, guru, but I've got to go my own way. You know, will you release me from my vows? I have to go off and find truth in my own way." And Acharya Tulsi, who I met, was a free thinker himself and said, "No problem, do your thing, you know, but just stick to the code of looking for absolute truth, because that's what a true Jain does." When I met Acharya Tulsi, we had a good discussion and I asked him loads of questions, but I didn't ask him what he thought of Rajneesh's later career. We didn't get around to that. There wasn't time, unfortunately. And then he's gone and died since. So he began teaching, and initially it's sort of in a semi-academic environment, so he was a philosophy lecturer. You know, a bit like I was at Oxford or whatever. But then it was so popular what he was teaching that it sort of outgrew academia. So he set up his own ashram and began teaching in Pune, in that part of India, in the sort of west coast area, north of Mumbai and inland a bit. And because it was the late 60s, early 70s, students started coming from Europe and America, because going to India for my generation was a big pilgrimage we did, you know, going and finding the hidden master. And a lot of this generation ended up at Rajneesh's ashram in Pune, which was very well organised. It was very well run. You know, there were like a dormitory you could stay for not very much, and you could even take initiation into what was called sannyas, to become a sannyasin, which meant you renounced the world, you became a wandering fakir, a Sufi sage, and you would wear a certain maroon robe, a bit this colour actually, as a sannyasin. And many people did this. They joined the Rajneesh community and became a sannyasin. I've met many people who did this. And they're quite deep people. It particularly attracted women, and one of the most controversial parts of Rajneesh's teaching was that it was time for men and women to level the playing fields. Men have been dominating society for too long in most religions. If you look at most of the boxes, it's mostly men who are running the show. And Rajneesh said, no, we won't save the world with just more men setting up religions. We need to unleash the power, the serpent energy within women, the Shakti energy, as he called it. And he commented on tantric texts which had given these secrets about women's spirituality and sexuality. They're interconnected. In the male sort of religion, you abstain from sexuality because it depletes your energy, is what the tantrics said. Rajneesh said, no, that's nonsense. That's just like because they don't want to give their power away to the women, so they become celibate. No, a true sage or seer will embrace the Shakti and they will reach co-enlightenment. And so Rajneesh, and this is a secret that, you know, he said, look, I'm teaching this stuff. Normally, I ought to be up in a cave in the Himalayas and only tell like 3 people that make it up there. But I've come down to Pune and I'm teaching you 10,000 people in this hall the most esoteric secrets about tantric sex that you'll ever hear in your lifetime. And of course the Westerners, who were like the hippie generation, lapped it up. They all said, wow, can I get some? You know, and he was like a prophet to that free love generation in the 70s. And they loved it. A lot of them were rich kids from America, from Hollywood, whatever. They gave him lots of money, and you know, he became a real success. So much so that eventually they persuaded him to uproot from India and leave Pune and build a city in Oregon on the northwest coast of America. They bought the land. These were like the sons of rich kids, people making millions in American business life who'd become sannyasins and renounced it all and wanted to give millions to this movement. So they bought 100 or more acres of land in Oregon and set up what was going to become called Rajneeshpuram, you know, Rajneesh city. And they were well organised. They built the buildings, they put the roads in, the drains, the electricity. It was coming up as a really, like a big city, you know. And there is a thing in America, that's done in America. The Mormons did it. I think we looked at the Mormons when we were looking at Christianity. They went and founded Salt Lake City. You know, so a new religious movement founding a city, it's not too surprising in America, right? Unfortunately, all kinds of politics got involved. And I think it's a tragedy. I still don't know the full story. I don't know that anyone ever does. But what seems to have happened is that the locals in the nearby villages and towns didn't really want this mega, like, tantric sex superstar guru coming and teaching in their sleepy little backwoods part of Oregon. And they saw him as a threat to, like, established order and the American way of life. And, you know, we're all good Christians here, kind of thing. And so there was a backlash against it. And they managed to talk some of the mayors in neighbouring towns and villages and in the politics of Oregon into finding that these guys hadn't done everything right. They hadn't got the certificate for the water supply. They hadn't got the right, bit of paperwork for the electricity. They hadn't got the right to put the road in that direction, and so on and so on and so on. So they kept trying to hem in with the bureaucracy to block Rajneeshpuram coming into being, you know, as only local bureaucrats can do. And it's a tragic story because that made some of the disciples even more annoyed, and they started, like, arming. You know, they would get guns in case the locals would come and attack them. You know, things got a bit heavy, right? I don't know, the whole thing has never really been researched in detail. I think it was a mistake, and I'm just saying as a historian, if you look at this thing, it's like a hubris thing. Rajneesh started out with the best intentions. He was a genius, a great guy. I personally don't think he should have accepted this come and build a city in Oregon thing. It's like, that's hubris. That's like asking for trouble, in my opinion. A true sage stays humble, always, and always dives below the wave when it comes at you. You know, you don't try and fight the wave. And I think Rajneesh made some ethical errors in this, and it's sad because he was a very wise man. He accepted a lot of money. These rich kids would give him Rolls Royces, great super status car, and towards the end of his time in Rajneeshpuram, he had about 60 Rolls Royces that he owned, and his idea of a good fun prank was to drive the convoy of 60 Rolls Royces with him in the front one, looking at all the disciples waving, like the Queen, you know. I mean, come on, that's an ego trip. I mean, he would justify it and say, well, I'm just having fun, you know, I'm just teasing these kids. But I still think it's wrong. It's a silly nonsense, with all due respect to Rajneesh. And but anyway, so you see, hubris always comes before a fall. The American government at a federal level started getting interested in him because they then discovered, lo and behold, he hadn't been paying his taxes. you know, all these millions to buy the Rolls Royce. Like, where's the cut for the government? Like, if people are giving him millions, like, where's the paper trail? Where's our cut? Said the American government. And Rajneesh said, "Oh, you can talk to my lawyers," and he put all the onus on sorting everything out on a little coterie of largely women who actually ran the ashram, the inner politics of it. Again, I think that was an error. And then he he tried to fly abroad. He tried to leave America at one point, but no country would have him. He was in this bizarre thing, flying around the world, and he wasn't allowed to land in India or anywhere else. He was that controversial, right? They just didn't want him. And as he was going through transit in America, in Washington D.C., I think the airport there, there is some evidence that he was poisoned. Certainly, he was arrested by the FBI, who interrogated him for many hours. And when I was in Pondicherry, some years later, I came across a book which I have on my shelves, which claims to prove that he was poisoned by the FBI. He was just too much of a nuisance to them, and they claim he was given a sandwich with polonium in. Now that's interesting, because that's the method of assassination used by Putin's inner circle. They killed several Russian types they don't like with polonium. It's possible that was done to Rajneesh. I suspend judgment, I can refer people to the book. If so, it's a tragic end of a charismatic and great, spiritual teacher. It also, I don't think it looks very well on the American government. I don't think one should assassinate spiritual teachers, just because they haven't paid their taxes. I mean, fine, surely he could have paid his back taxes. Personally, I think he should never have left India. He should have just stayed, done his teaching, and then retired to a little cave in the Himalayas and been humble like all the other rishis in Rishikesh and further up into the Himalayas. So I think it's a morality fable of what happens if you stop being Jain and become a superstar. You might end up losing your humility. Anyway, that's why he qualifies the new religious movement, and there are still many tens of thousands of people that believe he was the avatar of our age. That is why he was killed off, they say, because he was the Christ, the Buddha, the Muhammad, all rolled into one, come back to remind us and wake us up. And certainly the quality of teachings is very profound. He also did recordings, so you can listen to his voice. He had a beautiful way of speaking, like blowing the wind, and you can understand what he's saying, with this really lovely Indian accent. He was a very charismatic teacher, and, was he the pole of the age? Well, no wonder he was killed off, if so. But on the other hand, I think a bit more humility would have gone down better. Right, now we come to our next box, which is, and I've estimated there are about 10,000 devotees of his at the moment in the world alive. Probably about 100,000 have passed through the sannyasic traditions in box 93. And he was a big influence, but because of the way he died and how it all went a bit pear-shaped, I think, it's very sad. Right, moving on, we come to Reiki, which is another fascinating tradition, and this could count as a Far Eastern new religious movement, effectively, from Japan, and it was put together by particular Japanese spiritual seekers, but also based on Tibetan Buddhist ideas. So Reiki is a new religious movement, an amalgam of Buddhist and Shinto and even some Christian ideas got involved. It's become very popular in the West, particularly as a form of spiritual healing. And people say they're a Reiki master. It means they've trained how to give this spiritual healing to people. The religious bit is the knowledge that you have to learn in order to do that spiritual healing. And I've known many different Reiki masters and mistresses, although I think they call themselves masters. Reiki is translated as the word universal life force energy. The Japanese word is made up of two characters, meaning spirit and energy. And it was introduced to the West by Takata Hawayo, who was a Japanese American who had learned it. And he claimed to be the recipient of the founder, his energy, Usui Makau, who lived from 1865 to 1926. Now, Usui, who was Japanese, was also a Christian who was trying to ask where's the source of Christ's healing power? Because Christ obviously had this healing ability. It's in the Gospels. And Usui thought maybe I'll find it in Buddhism, because he couldn't find it amongst the Christians in Japan. Then he went fasting on a sacred mountain, Mount Kurama, near Kyoto. And after this fasting, he had this mystical download, understanding the meaning of the healing symbols that he found in these old Buddhist texts. So, Buddhism has these ancient texts which have esoteric symbols, and suddenly he realized he could understand them now. He'd been interested in spiritual healing since the late 1890s, but this experience on Mount Kurama happened around 1914, and this was when Reiki began to take off, because he used his new knowledge that he gained for spiritual healing, and then he taught other people to do it. And it's interesting that that many thousands of people, probably, tens of thousands of people have become Reiki masters. It's very big in England, and I'm sure in France and America and places. And they all go back to this one guy and his experience fasting on a mountain, which is what's interesting about these new religious movements. What was it he saw? How can we know? One of the things that Reiki insists on is what you get taught how to visualize these symbols. So as you're healing somebody, you visualize one of these mystic symbols, and it has a sort of effect on the healing current. That's one of the secrets. Now, otherwise it seems to me it's very similar to spiritual healing, which is practiced in the West for many centuries, going right back to early times. And spiritualism is in fact the next one we're going to be looking at, box number 97. So I think Reiki is a kind of Eastern current form of spiritualism and spiritual healing. And I've known many people that have trained as spiritual healers, and I'm not sure that there's anything Reiki does that's much more effective than what spiritual healers learn to do. I have a lot of respect for spiritual healers. I think, it'd be interesting to research Reiki more and see how, if it's 20 times more effective than spiritual healing, then go for it. Let's all do Reiki. It seems to me it's a bit of a cult, a bit of a, it's a fad. These religions come in fads, Just as in the 70s it was a fad to become a disciple of Rajneesh and take sannyasin, and then that died away. And so I think it was a fad to do Reiki in over the last 15 years. I'm not sure I don't know if anyone's done a PhD on the effectiveness of Reiki compared to the effectiveness of spiritual healing and traditional styles. That would be something worth studying, and I suspend judgment till I see it. But I like the idea, and I think it's very gentle. I don't think it does any harm, unlike some forms of alternative medicine. If you don't know what you're doing, you can cause real damage. I don't think Reiki could harm a fly, because you never touch the body, it's hands off, and you're working with the magical visualization techniques. And so yeah, so I don't think there's any danger to it at all. I noticed in Britain, one of my friends and students has told me now you can do what's called social prescribing on the NHS, the National Health Service. Not just giving medicines. So a doctor, if they see you and you come in, you're very anxious, nervous, suicidal thoughts, depressed, whatever, you don't only have to give them some kind of medicine to take away the symptoms. Now you can do what's called social prescribing, which could be, I want you to go and do this yoga class for 10 weeks. I want you to go and do Dr. Daffern's philosophy class for 10 weeks. Or I want you to go and study and do yoga training, Reiki training for 10 weeks. And the NHS will let you do that. They will pay for you to get that training. Now I think that's a good thing. I think we should diversify what the NHS does and extend the boundaries of what we think of as healing. We've got too fixated on healing means going to see a doctor who doesn't really care about you and just gives you some pills to take. Sometimes the pills are great, they can save lives, they can work, but I don't think that's the be-all and end-all of healing. So I think having somebody stand over you with their hands, beaming love into you, can be part of a magical healing act as well. And so, yeah, so that's why Reiki is quite popular, I think. Right, okay, let's move on. And look at spiritualism, in fact, because this again is a fascinating one. And let me see if I've got my reference book, because that would be useful. Just bear with me a second. Right, there we are. Yes, so this is the book that comes along with the periodic table. And in each box it has a lot of the data that is needed, so that's very useful. Right, now, there we are. Okay, so spiritualism, you can date it to different sort of dates. I mean, there are two currents really, and one is the Anglo-Saxon tradition of spiritualism. There's another current which in France is called Spiritism, and that is a parallel current associated with a chap called Allan Kardec, who was a bit before the Anglo-Saxon one. But anyway, the Anglo-Saxon one goes back to 1848, you could argue, and the experience of the Fox sisters in New England, who discovered that they seemed to be psychic. They could hear raps in their house in New York in answer to questions. So, you could ask a question like, "How did my mother die? Was she killed?" 2 raps means yes, 1 no. And they'd have conversations with these invisible spirit beings. And the parents thought, this is interesting, they're not making it up. They checked, there was no fakery going on, these raps were happening. And then local people started coming in, and it became quite a vogue thing to go and check out the Fox sisters and ask questions. And from then it extended a bit more, because people started also realising that you could have seances with a table in which one person, a medium, would act as a sitter and was able to channel, not just with raps, but to channel thoughts and ideas and words and visions from people who had departed. So mediums became a big thing, and it swept over America and Britain and Europe and France and Russia during the course of the latter part of the 19th century. And societies were set up to train mediums. The College of Psychical Studies is still going in London, for instance. And people scientifically sort of studied whether these mediums are genuine. They're not making it up. They must be real. But how do you explain it? Like, where are these spirit beings? Where do they go? So things like the Society for Psychical Research were founded in Britain, which I belonged to and used to use their library when I lived in London. In France, it was a similar thing. There was a chap called Allan Kardec. That's his assumed name after his rebirth. He's a very interesting intellectual, actually, who began his life studying with Pestalozzi, who was one of the greatest educators of the late 18th century, early 19th, who lived in Switzerland. Pestalozzi believed that children are all potential geniuses, every child, but they have to be helped to bring that out, to manifest it in the way that is best. Somebody might be a genius like Messi at soccer, but somebody else might be a genius like Van Gogh at painting, or at music like Beethoven. Find the genius within each person and then manifest it. Don't impose on them a whole structured educational thing. Find what they're going to be really good at and then feed that like a flame. Give them the tools to be even better. So in the case of a musical genius, we'll teach them music. Teach them to appreciate music and to write it. Teach them compositional skills, or playing skills. Anyway, Pestalozzi was a great man. He was a Freemason, actually, so he fits in one of our boxes. And this man, Allan Kardec, went and studied with him and was a protege. So Kardec came out a genius. He was good at maths, he was good at science, at chemistry, at physics, at literature, at grammar, at philosophy. And before he was 30, he was publishing books transforming the way we teach chemistry and physics and maths in French. And he was transforming the way they teach literature and grammar. He'd analyse language back to its source and proposed new forms of grammatical thinking. So he became a teacher, obviously, and was like highly respected as an intellectual. Teachers really respected him. And then some people told him about spiritualism. They said to him, look, have you ever been to a seance? Do you understand what's going on here? What's happening? Like, is it all fakery and made up? And at first, he said, no, it's all fakery. There's nothing happening here. It's not real. It's just people pretending to get messages so they can get money off people. But then he went along to some actual seances and met some of the mediums. And he did some actual sittings and asked questions. And he was blown away. He realised, no, they can't be cheating. This is not just fakery. And he saw, which is similar to me, actually. I had similar experience, similar journey. He realised, anyway, and he, being a scholar, he went into it in absolute detail. He got every single report of the French academic societies into spiritualism and mediumship. He read through them all. He went and interviewed the leading mediums in Paris to prove, whether they're faking or not. And he had to realise, he had to say, no, they're not, And so he then published a book about this. I think it was called The World of Spirits in French. And he did it under the name of Allan Kardec, which wasn't his real name. Because during one of the sittings of a medium in Paris, they told him that was his original name, and that he'd been a druid in Old Gaul, in Brittany, called Kardec. And so he assumed this name from his past life. Slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I think he believed it was true. Anyway, his work was like a real revelation for French intellectual society, which hitherto had not taken spiritualism seriously. It had been sunk in a kind of materialist worldview that the French philosophers had promoted. There's no soul, there's no survival after death, there's just physical body. The French have got really good at analysing what the physical body's made of, people like Pasteur and so on. Brilliant scientists, but the soul didn't exist for them. Man is just a machine. Whereas Kardec in a sense, proved that man is more than a machine. There is a soul which survives death. Now, the church had an ambiguous relation to him, because you would have thought the Catholic Church, the dominant church in France, would have liked this research and would say, great, he's proved our theories about survival after death. But actually, the church didn't like what he was saying, because well, what if everybody can contact the spiritual world and they don't have to come to church anymore? What if they can go direct to the angels? Because some of the mediums were influenced by angels they could contact. They were getting messages from great saints of the past, Joan of Arc and all these things. Well, hang on. Nobody's authorised this, said the church. This isn't happening in church property. We're not in charge of this. So this must be a heresy. So the church in France then declared that Allan Kardec was a heretic. And they got the Emperor, Napoleon III, who was a bit of a slow-witted guy, actually, to, not come to his defence. And so Kardec was hounded at the behest of the church as a heretic. And his books were impounded. He was becoming very well known. They were shipping books to Spain and all over the world. And the French got the authorities to capture all the books and burn them. The bishop in Spain oversaw a burning of Kardec's works, which had been seized by customs. Well, I don't agree. I don't think this is right. It's a bit like, killing off Rajneesh with a plutonium sandwich. It's any kind of new emergence of new ideas often gets a kickback from the old establishment. And that's one of the things you have to be quite careful about. It's one of the interesting things about new religious movements is that they do often cause this furore by the old establishment. I mean, Sikhism is a kind of a new religious movement. It's got its own boxes. And when Sikhism was founded in India to reconcile Hindu and Muslims, the Muslims really didn't like it, and they went for the Sikhs and they killed them and martyred them and cut them in pieces and tortured them to death, And the Baha'is have been persecuted in Iran. Again, a new religious movement, which we'll come and look at in a minute. Not liked by the established religion, which is Orthodox Shia Islam, and a lot of them have been martyred. So that tells us something about human nature, I think. But anyway, Kardec survived, and his wife supported him through those dark days, and his ideas took on, and there are spiritualist groups around France that still look back on him as their founder. And interestingly enough, it really flourished in Portugal, and Kardec's work is really well known in Portugal and Brazil, the great Portuguese colony. Brazil has 100 million spiritualists who all reckon Kardec as a genius. And because it's such a multicultural society, it's Portuguese, African slaves, indigenous Indians, Europeans from Germany and Italy and everything. Brazil is like a melting pot. And so spiritualism is a kind of, it's the secret national religion of Brazil now, but don't tell anyone. And I've met people from Brazil that, of course spirits were real, and of course mediums are real, and everyone knows that, don't they? That's their starting point. And because they've got the incredible Amazon jungle and all the shamanic traditions there, they get on very well. The Brazilian shamans in the jungle and the spiritualists who've read Kardec in the big cities, they can talk the same language, And I met some of them. They're amazing people. In Britain, there were some other great spiritualists at work. A woman called Emma Harding Britton was quite famous. She was a great spiritualist who was a medium. And she received lots of messages and, powerful stuff. And she received messages from Robert Owen, who was one of the founders of socialism in Wales and Britain.